Hi everyone, this is COMP2068 JavaScript Frameworks. This is the recap of everything that we have covered so far in weeks 1 and 2, and this is the week 3 video. So what we're going to be going over today is just kind of re-going over what we've learned thus far with Node and being able to use Express for hosting a web server. So the first thing is we write our code in JavaScript, but what we end up using to run that JavaScript code is Node. So when you're writing your files, it's in a JavaScript file. You're not writing Node. However, there are libraries that are provided by Node that allow us to interact with stuff that usually JavaScript is not able to handle, such as writing to the file system, doing more kind of like hardware, not hardware, but on computer stuff that usually is locked down by the browser. So the one thing that we'll do is if I open in our editor, what we can do is we can create a new file. So I'm going to call it index.js, and right now it doesn't have anything there. So there is a lot of different commands that we end up running in our application, but the first one that will start off our project is npm init. And what npm is it's the Node package manager that comes pre-installed with Node. You don't have to install it separately. When you install Node, it comes with it. And what init does is it allows us to initialize our Node project. So you can see right here that this utility will walk you through creating a package.json file. And it's just some pretty simple questions. It just asks you, what your package name is going to be, and anything that you see in between the parentheses is the default thing. So in this case, it's just taking the name of the folder, week 3, I can just hit enter. Version 1.0.0, yep. Description, we don't need one. Our entry point, index.js. Our test command, we don't need one. Our Git repository, we can create after the fact. Keywords doesn't matter, author doesn't matter, license doesn't matter, and we can just say yes. That's fine. So, as mentioned, npm init will initialize our project and create our package.json folder. Package.json is the metadata of our entire application. It's where it houses our name, what our dependencies of our project require, and in the one that we are going to be using over and over again in our projects from week to week is Express. So the first thing that we're going to do after initializing our project is I'm going to type npm install express and then /save. And let me make this a little bit bigger so that you can see it on the screen. So npm install without using /save will just install the dependency for us. I know in some things sometimes it will automatically change our package.json to add Express as our dependency. Sometimes it doesn't, depending on the Node version that you're using. But I'm just going to type npm install express /save, and if we open up our code editor, we can now see that Express is a dependency of our application. And what Express does is it allows us to easily set up a HTTP server without doing very much. It handles a lot of the stuff behind the scenes for us. So in order to use it, inside of our index.js file, we can type const express equals require express. So you can see right here that we're requiring Express, and without using any sort of relative pathing, it knows to look for Express inside of our Node modules folder, which you can see is now right here after doing npm install. So there's a lot that is installed into our project already, but Express, if we open up, you can see is right here under our Node modules. So if we want to use it, we can now create a variable called app, and this is going to be initializing our Express application. So we say Express, call it as a function, and that gives us app. The other thing that we need is we need to know what port number. As you guys know, there's different port numbers that you can use. by default, your browser, there's two different ports. When you connect to a website with HTTP, it typically runs on port 80, and if you're connecting over HTTPS, it uses port 443. However, we can connect on any port that we want, and default in a lot of Node applications is on port 3000. So I'm just going to say const port equals 3000. I'm going to say app.listen on that port, and then I'm just going to do a console log that says we are now listening on HTTP, localhost, and then our port. So this is pretty bare bones of our application. One other thing that I could also do is say app.get, and on our index page, and we have req, res, which I will explain or re-explain after this. And I'm just going to do res.send hello world. This is pretty much the most bare bones server that you can create in Node using Express. So now if I typed in node index.js, it will now start our application. You can see that it's listening on here. So if I open it up into my browser, you see that I get hello world. So mentioned in class, if I end up making a change, so if I change hello world, if I change that to being something else, so I say hello test, and I save that, and I reopen my browser, and I'm going to refresh right now, it still says hello world. And the reason for this is when Node starts up, it reads all of our files and puts that code in memory. So when it actually hits this, it's grabbing the old code that we had before that said hello world. So another module that we end up using that's provided on NPM is called nodemon. And this allows us, what it does is it watches our files, and when there is a file change, it will automatically restart Node for us. So if I type in npm install --save dev nodemon, this will install nodemon as a development dependency. Because we're not using nodemon on the server, if we were to deploy this, when we deploy our code, we don't need to watch for file changes, because the only time that the files change is when we push up new code, instead of constantly making code changes as we're running it on our machine. So you can tell that this worked properly if you go to your package.json and you see dev dependencies nodemon right there. So what we can also do is now instead of typing in node with index.js, we can say nodemon index.js. And you'll see that it's using nodemon if it has these changes that are up here. It now has some yellow and green text saying nodemon, and now it's working. So if I end up opening up the browser, which I changed back to saying hello world, if I now go into and change hello to hello test, open up my terminal, you can see right here that it says nodemon restarting due to changes. So it restarted our application, and now when I refresh, it now says hello test. So this is how we can use nodemon in order to watch our file changes, so that way we don't have to restart every single time. Now, one thing that can be a little bit confusing is different projects will use different packages. Sometimes people use nodemon, sometimes there's other tools that people use that are similar to nodemon but maybe not the same. So what people do is they create shortcut commands in their application using the scripts provided under package.json. You can see right here is one script that's for test. This was created when we used npm init, and it asked us what our test command was going to be. In this case, because we didn't enter in anything, it just put in a blank that's right here. So I'm just going to remove that, and I'm going to create a new one that's called start. And in this case, this is just going to run node index.js like we did in our terminal. But now we're going to create another one that's called dev, and this is going to be for development, where we type nodemon index.js. So we have our start, which is just going to run our application normally, and then we have a dev script that will run nodemon to detect file changes. So if I now, instead of typing in nodemon index.js, I can now just type npm run dev. And you can see that it runs this command, nodemon index.js, behind the scenes. So as our commands can get more and more complex, you don't want to have to type it out every single time, but what's also really helpful is just by going into the scripts folder under package.json, you can see what scripts they have set up for their project. So we have start and we have dev, and like I said, right now it says hello test. So that's really enough about package.json. Like I said, it's really just the metadata of our application. So if you want to quickly find out something about how a project is maybe structured, or what dependency it uses, what it uses for development, it's all located in here. And sometimes you have more information such as the author and stuff like that. But we're not going to go far too much into that. That's usually used for more open source projects, which obviously we're not doing in this class. But going to our index.js, this is where our server is lying. So you can see that we required an express, we created our app, and then we have app.get. So there's different types of HTTP methods that you can use. There's get, which is when you just go to a URL, just type it into your browser, that's a GET request. And then as you know, there's also POST, which is when usually you have a form and you click submit and you're using the method of POST, and that will send a POST request to the server. So I could also do another one of app.post on our index page, and if we set up a form in here, this would allow us to handle that POST request. But of course, we're not doing any sort of forms right now, so we can just get rid of that. But the two important parts is the first part, which is what our URL is. So this is the URL that's being used. It's just on /, which is our index route. You can use a couple different things for this to get pretty unique URLs. So you can do app.get. I'm going to do /test/ and then I'm going to give it a colon with a name that's there. So what the colon part is this is a parameter that is going to be in our URL. So if I just type in res.send hello test, I'm going to change our index to hello world. So if I go to it now, so if I type in /test/hello, we get hello test. But what we want to do is we can now get this hello into the message that we're sending back using the request parameters. So if I type in, let's just console log request.params.id. And as mentioned before, there's two parts. So I mentioned the first part of app.get, which is the string value of what our URL is. The second part is a callback, and that callback has two parameters. REQ, which is the request that comes from the client, and RES, which is response of what is sent back to the user. So in this case, trying to get the query or the request parameter of the URL that they're hitting, that's coming from the request. So we type in req.params, and then we do .id, because that's what we named it up top. So I can console log that ID, and if I open up the browser, put that to the side, open up our terminal, put that to the side, and when I refresh, you can see that we get hello printed to our terminal. If I put in something else, like I said, foo, you can see foo is printed to the terminal. If I type in bar, bar is also put to the terminal. So this is a dynamic parameter of our URL. So that's how sites, like you have a YouTube, obviously all of those YouTube URLs are not hard-coded, it's using an ID. And this is how we end up using it. I'm sure you guys have used it in other programming languages. So if we wanted to make it something else. So we have say and then message. And what we're going to do is we're just going to send request.params.message, because we're no longer using ID. We've changed this from ID to message, so that console log is not going to work. But what I can do is in here, I say /say/hello world, and it's now printed it to the console. But I could do something else like COMP2068 JavaScript frameworks, and it's now printing that or sending it back through our server. So that's why, as mentioned, REQ is the request. So when we get anything that's coming from the user or from the person that's viewing our page, we reference it under REQ. And then RES is the response that's being sent back. So we have RES, and we're sending back that message. So hopefully that makes sense. But if we wanted to do something that's a little more complex, there's a couple things that we could do. So in Lab 2, one of the requirements was being able to take query parameters, which is different than a parameter as a part of our URL, and do some math based off of the search parameters. So in this case, I could just say we have /say hello world, and then we're going to add a query parameter of prefix, which we're going to say hello. So let's just now make it say world. So right now we have /say world, and then we have a search parameter of prefix. So if we wanted to access that, what we can do is same thing as before. We can just say const prefix equals request.query.prefix, and then what we can do is we can send them both together. So we can say prefix plus, and I'm going to just put in a space here, plus, and then now that's all one thing. So now if I refresh this, it says hello world. I can change this into world, and then hello, and now we have it backwards. So this is how we go about doing that. Obviously this video is a little bit harder to see if there's any questions about what's going on right now. But of course, if there's any questions that come up in this video, feel free to either shoot me an email, message me on Slack, or bring it up in class. So, trying to think. Let's see. So, we're able to get both query parameters and URL parameters, but let's say we want to do something that's a little more complex. Say we want to make sure, and we haven't covered this in class, but it is good to do. What we can do is we can set up middlewares for checking that stuff is working as expected. So let me get that back. So let's set up a new route, and it's going to be app.get, and we're going to have /number, and then it's expecting a number. And we're going to have the same thing, REQ, RES, and we're going to send back saying the number that was selected is, and we'll throw in REQ, params, number. So if I go to that route now and say number /1, the number that was selected is 1. But right now, if we put in any sort of thing, such as text, it's going to put that there. And there's two things that we could do. There's one, we could just do a check of making sure that something is a number before we end up sending back a response. So we could just say, let's see, so const number equals request.params.number. We'll say if is not a number of our number. So if it's not a number, we want to return res.send. This is not a number. So if we put in 1, it says the number is 1, but if we just put in some text, it says this is not a number. So that's one way that we can handle it. But what we could also do is we could set up what is called a middleware. And a middleware allows us to run, we can actually put in, so this is a callback function, and we can actually put in multiple callback functions if we need to execute some sort of code beforehand, just to make it easier. So what we can say is, well, I'm going to create a function that is called validate is number. And this is going to be a function that, same thing as down here, it has REQ and RES. And we're just going to take this part out. We're gonna cut this, put it in here, but instead of using res.send, well, we could do res.send. But what we also want to do is not just request and response, but we also want a third parameter that's called next. And all we have to do is just call next. So if it's not a number, we respond back saying it's not a number. Otherwise, we say next, which means go to the next available function or route. So I can now just copy paste this in, our validate is number in front. So it'll go our string, our function right here, and then our second function. And now it does the exact same thing. And if I put in a number, it will go to our next route. So I can just, if I just console log our number right here, put them side by side, you'll see that it'll only print out the number if it's an actual number. If we just put in some garbage text, nothing happens. But the moment that we put in a different number, 5, it prints it out. And the reason for this is the middleware, we return just our response here, but it never actually goes to the next route. So we could just validate our number, so that way we can make sure that everything is as expected before we handle any of the logic inside of there. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I know the hard thing with this class is we're going to be going over a lot of different technologies very quickly, running a lot of different commands in our terminal, and it can be hard to keep it all there. I will be posting, and alongside with this video is kind of like a cheat sheet of the different commands that we are using in the class, and I'm hoping to continually update it so that way as we use more commands more often, we'll be able to do it. But I'll be putting in like the npm init, git init, git add dot, so both for our source control for using git, but also for node and npm. So with that, there's not really a whole lot that we have covered, but I know that it can be very confusing at first. So I hope that this video is helpful for those of you that maybe feel like you're falling behind. If you do feel, even after this video, that you're not fully grasping what's going on, I do encourage you to reach out, and I will try to connect you either with people who can help you learn and succeed in this class, or even just being able to offer you extra assistance on making sure that you're caught up and that you're following what's going on. So with that being said, that's the end of the video. Like I said, there's not a whole lot that we have covered, but if you had managed to get to the end of this video successfully, what you can look at yourself and what you have done is you've been able to install a third-party module that's such as Express and NodeMon. You're able to create your HTTP server and listen on a port, and then you're also able to set up routes in the URL. Really, everything after that is just sending HTML. Instead of using res.send, you can do, there's different ways that you can do it, which we will cover in class, but after that, all it is just sending HTML to the user. So with that being said, I hope you, I'll see you guys in class. I hope you have a good weekend, and yeah, thanks.